All right, so we're going to be looking at some more factors that affect plant growth. Obviously, the main ones are carbon dioxide, water, okay, sunlight, okay, things like that, quality of soil, okay. But there's a bit more to it than that, and we kind of group the factors that affect climate into different categories. Okay, so we'll be kind of looking at those categories and going into a little bit more detail about, excuse me, the different factors that can affect a plant's growth. Okay, a bunch of which we have not yet talked about. All right, so first off, there are a bunch of non-living factors that can affect a plant's growth. We call these abiotic. Biotic would be living, abiotic is non-living, right? So these things would be like mineral or kind of inorganic types of things that a plant would require. So if we're looking at this picture here, okay, the inorganic parts of the ecosystem that the plant lives in would be, the sun, the soil, right? The amount of precipitation, okay, that's not organic. But then there's the things that you don't really see on here. Like, what else could affect the growth of a plant that could be part of its environment? Wind, yeah, okay. Wind can certainly affect how a plant grows. It can change its shape. It's almost like a thigmotropism type of stimuli. Altitude, because it affects the amount of oxygen and carbon dioxide and atmospheric pressure and how much ultraviolet light there is. Yeah, a natural disaster, how frequent are they? Okay, I mean, obviously in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of wildfires. Okay, that's a natural disaster that kind of is harmful to plants. Okay, but also it's important in kind of cycling everything. Hmm? Soil pH, yeah, okay, and that can be from the type of rocks that the soil is eroded from, okay, and things like that. But something that we haven't mentioned yet that's on here is temperature, right? I mean, plants don't grow very well if it's below freezing. Okay, I mean, plants can survive freezing, but they're not growing below freezing. Okay, why are they not growing when it's below freezing? Yeah, you can't transport water in a solid state. Okay, like it doesn't evaporate as a solid. Well, I mean, it can, but that's just sublimation. It's totally different, and I don't think a plant would pull that off. Okay, besides, it would have to have active leaves going, okay, at that point, which it's not going to have. So temperature is certainly a big factor there because plants can't regulate their temperature like some animals. Okay, so it's definitely a big factor. All right, so these can include temperature. Okay, first one. So it's an important factor because of its effect on biological processes and the inability of most organisms to regulate their body temperature precisely. Okay? Very few organisms are actually capable of doing that. And even the ones that can only can do it within a narrow range. Okay? Like for example, human beings, like the ability for us to really maintain effective body temperature minus putting on a bunch of layers, okay, kind of artificially, would be, you know, 5 degrees to about 40 degrees. Okay, that's about the range where we can effectively manage our body temperature. Okay, you know where what temperatures most hypothermia deaths occur in? It's actually warmer than that even. Okay, it's between -5 and +5. That's when most people, that's when the largest number of hypothermic deaths occur because people don't think it's that cold, right? So they don't have enough layers or enough warm clothing or whatever. I mean, yes, people die when it's -40 due to exposure, certainly, okay? But you don't go outside all that often either, right? And if you do, you put on like 4 coats and you're ready for it, okay? But yeah, it's more often that people actually die of exposure in more mild temperatures just because they're not prepared for it. And our body doesn't do a good job of, okay, maintaining body temperature in anything really below 5 degrees, even below 10 degrees to an extent. Okay, and now, are there some animals that can do a better job? Certainly. Okay, there's lots of animals that have a much wider range. Okay, I mean, if you live outside in this environment, you've got to be able to do that. Okay, and they have adaptations to that, like they have a winter coat and a summer coat. So if you ever look at like the mountain sheep or the deer, right? They in the springtime they all look horribly mangy and sick because they're losing their winter coat and it's all patchy. Okay, but in the winter, it's all full. Plants, of course, don't have a winter coat and a summer coat because they don't do that. Okay, but they can't regulate their body temperature either. Okay. So the big worry here, if it becomes too hot, they could lose too much water, or some of their enzymes and things like that would cease to function at high temperatures. Okay. Or if they become too cold, ice crystals can form in their cells. Okay. And then again, enzymes can break down. Enzymes only work in a narrow range of temperatures. Okay. And that's why running a fever can be very bad. Okay. Um, so if we're looking at, again, like a human being here as an example, what's our ideal body temperature? Yeah, it's about 37 degrees, 36.9 to 37.1, somewhere in there. Okay, is pretty normal. You get to get your body temperature upwards of 39 or 40, and you're in big trouble. Okay, like you can die if you sustain that fever for any length of time, because the enzymes in our body don't function at that temperature. They actually start to denature because they're proteins. They change, their shape changes, and they no longer work. So whatever it was they were doing isn't getting done. Okay, and the same is true if our body temperature starts to drop. Okay, the things that work in our body are designed to work between about 36 degrees and about 38 degrees, and after that, they don't work very well. Well, I mean, it wouldn't be, because the processes in our body produce heat naturally, right? So if at 37 degrees, we're going to feel hot, not because, yeah, our body is the same temperature, because our body needs to be able to get rid of energy to maintain that temperature. Right? So, kind of the ideal temperature for people is, between about 17 and 25, somewhere in there. Okay? Just because of how much energy we need to lose. Absolutely. Can shatter a tree. Like you see the tree crack if that happens. It's pretty rare, right? You would have to get a sustained cold snap when trees were in full leaf, right? So if, let's say, in July, the temperature suddenly dropped to -10 and stayed there for a day and a half, then yeah, that could happen for sure. Oh yeah, like if you ever seen what a tomato looks like after a frost, if you didn't cover it, that's what it looked. That's what happens. It's essentially gets wilty, right? Because the water vacuoles have all broken and the fluid is spilled out of them, and they can no longer exert any turgor pressure. So the plant wilts and dies, right? Usually, what also happens is the ice crystals are sharp and they rupture the cell membranes, and everything just, yeah, is done, right? Okay, water. Okay, obviously a very important abiotic factor because it's not living. Okay, and its availability varies drastically. Some places have too much of it, some places have too little of it, and some have just the right Goldilocks amount of it. Okay, but it does vary drastically, and plants have to adapt to: is it always available? Is it available sometimes? Is it never available? Okay, and they have to have adaptations to that. Okay, sunlight, obviously not a living thing. Okay, so it's an abiotic factor, and it provides the energy that drives nearly all ecosystems. And I say nearly all because there, of course, are some deep ocean kind of benthic environments that are minus sunlight, and they can actually thrive. Okay, but they're very, very different. So only the photosynthetic organisms can use its energy directly, but they are the base of the food chain or food pyramid, whichever one you've been taught. Okay, so we generally they're the only ones that can harness it, and they're the food for everything else. Okay, light also influences the behavior of many plants and animals. Length of day is the single best indicator for cueing seasonal events. Okay, when do most plants start to flower and blossom around here? Well, it's like late spring, right? It's usually like June. Most of the time, the trees aren't in full leaf until late May. Like May long weekend is kind of oh, the trees all have leaves on them finally, right? Kind of a thing. So most of the flowering is going to occur, kind of right around the solstice, sorry, the summer solstice. So that's the end of spring and the beginning of summer. Okay, around here, you go down to a lower latitude, and that'll happen earlier, right? But yeah, length of day, okay, is definitely the single best indicator. When it gets to a certain number of hours and plants are able to carry out a certain amount of photosynthesis, they can start flowering, because you don't want to flower unless you're going to make sure you have enough sunlight to carry out enough photosynthesis to put sugar in where? What are you going to make after you flower? Fruit. Yeah, and fruit represents a lot of energy being put away, right? So you've got to make sure that there's going to be a lot of photosynthesis that can go on so you can make enough sugar to fill up a fruit. Okay. All right, migration for animals is another one. Obviously, that's cued by length of day as well. Okay, and length of day also cues abscisic acid to be produced, and that's when plants will go dormant, okay, in the fall. So it's more than just an energy source, it's also like a clock, okay, tells them when, or a calendar when they got to do certain things. Wind, okay, wind is a overlooked factor affecting plant growth for many reasons. First off, it increases the rate of evaporation. That means things dry out faster. That's why your hair dryer isn't just a heat lamp. Okay, it's a heat lamp with a powerful fan, right? Though the combination of heat and movement makes things evaporate and dry out faster. Okay, it also causes wind chill. Anybody notice that this morning? I sure noticed it when I went out to shovel my driveway and didn't have a toque in my pocket. Okay, I was like, oh, you get that ear that's facing the wind. You're like, I got to shovel the other way for a little while, get the other ear cold, and let that one be out of the wind. Okay, so it increases heat loss due to evaporation and convection. That's wind chill. Okay, and also contributes to water loss, increasing the rate of evaporation, just meaning it'll get drier faster as well. Okay, the other thing it can do is really alter the shape of some plants. Okay, if you go down like by Lethbridge and stuff, you'll notice that plants tend to be leaning a little bit one way. Okay, because it's always blowing from the west, so the trees actually have a little bit fewer branches on the western side, and they tend to lean a little bit towards the east, just because the wind has kind of warped them that way. Okay, and you see that also near the tree line in the mountains. Okay, certain types of trees, especially like a Douglas fir and things like that, will grow in what's called a crummels form. Okay, and a crummels form, okay, your normal spruce tree, okay, or fir tree, right, has that kind of a shape. When it's growing in a crummels form, it grows like this. And it grows almost no branches on the windward side. Okay, why would it not do that? Yeah, they'll get ripped off easier. Okay, and these ones down here will trap snow. As the wind kind of blows across, if it's snowing and blowing snow, the snow will get trapped in here and it creates a drift that will form around the tree. And then snow is a really good what? It's a good insulator. Yeah. Okay, that's why if you build a Quincy, it can save your life. Anyone ever built a Quincy? My kids and I build like one a year every. Okay. You just make a pile of snow and then you hollow it out and you crawl inside, and you can get it really warm in there. If you get several people in there, water droplets will start to fall on you because it'll get above zero inside. A bit, yes. The force of the wind, and I mean, yeah. So it's a bit of thigmotropism, but it's also a bit of those branches just get ripped off, so it just stops growing them over there, right? But yeah, it is. That's partly a thigmotropism kind of thing. No, they can't absorb it. Like it's in a crystallized form, it won't go through, the membranes and the roots and stuff like that. So this is just, they grow in this form because if you get a lot of snow surrounding you, the temperatures you face aren't as bad as if you're exposed, right? And these branches up here, even if they grew there, would be exposed. So they're likely to freeze off anyway. Okay, so these ones here that would capture the snow, they're gonna survive longer. So the tree just kind of grows in that sort of a form. It can still carry out photosynthesis because it's near the tree line. There aren't any really tall trees that are going to shade it. Okay, so it's just a natural adaptation, but it's an adaptation due to the wind. Okay, so that sort of makes sense. This is a picture of one of them. Right? You can see it's got no branches on this side. The whole tree is low to the ground. Right? So this is actually like only about 2 or 3 trees. This whole it looks like a shrub, right? But it's growing kind of bent to one side. They're really funky if you ever see one. Right? Did I take that picture before you were born? Not quite. Close though, right? Yeah. All right. Rocks and soil. Okay, so the physical structure, someone mentioned soil pH already, okay, mineral composition, etc., of the rocks in an area are really what determine what kind of soil is going to be in that area, because all soil is decomposed rock. Okay, I say decomposed, it's like eroded, but all right, it's essentially broken down. How fast do you suppose that process occurs? Yeah, very, very slowly, okay? The process of soil building takes a very, very long time, which is why farmers especially are very concerned about soil erosion. They don't want to lose soil because they know how long it takes to build it back up. Okay? So in an area like this, okay, how much soil do you see here? Not very much, okay? And if you look really closely at this picture, you can see a lot of rock in here. So yes, there's some soil, a little bit, but you also notice there are no tall, no big plants. Okay? It's like grasses and stuff that grows really close to the ground that doesn't require a deep root system, because that's as far into the ground as I could push that trowel. Okay, and in fact, I actually put a rock behind it that you can't see to hold it up so it wouldn't fall over. I couldn't stick it in the ground far enough, okay, for it to stand up on its own, because what did I keep hitting? Rocks. Okay, so this is very young soil. There isn't very much of it. Most of the material that's going to make more soil is in the process of being eroded and broken down. So this is like what it would be like above the tree line. Right, so if you go into the mountains above where the tree line is, do you ever know what I mean by tree line? Right? You can see it on the mountains when you can see the mountains. And it's where the trees end. So above that, there hasn't been a lot of time for soil to build up. And so the soil doesn't, A, have very many nutrients. It's B, not very thick. Okay. And so it can't support large life, okay, or large plant life. It's just going to be small, shrubby stuff. Oh, that adds to it. But remember, initially, it's rocks, right? That's what makes up the kind of the gritty parts of soil. The organic parts of soil, for sure, okay, are made from the decomposition of the organisms that have lived there previous. But that takes a lot longer to build up. Like you got to get a few growing there before you get that organic layer. Yeah, you could. The problem is that you need fines, like really fine stuff, right? I mean, if you've ever been to like any of the concrete plants, like Cargill and places like that, they have a gravel maker, like a rock crusher essentially, and it's just two kind of cones that just turn past each other, and they just squeeze the rocks and push them against each other and crush them. That's how they make gravel. That process is kind of that sped up, but again, you get to the point where there's sort of a minimum size you can create artificially with that process. Having, water freeze inside a rock will break a big rock into two smaller parts. But rocks sliding past each other, breaking tiny little fines off is what really builds up the soil particles. Yeah. So that process can take quite a while. Dust being blown on and deposited, okay, helps to build up soil. Yep. Yeah. I mean, around here, when you dig a hole, I mean, there's chunks of rock in the soil, right? I mean, there's always going to be chunks that haven't completely broken down, right? But there's also lots of much finer material. Okay, so the pH, the mineral composition, basically what kind of rocks produce that soil is going to influence what kind of plants can grow there, and thus how much of an organic layer there will be, okay, and how long it will take for the soil to really build. Okay. And then periodic disturbances. All right, obviously this would have been very destructive. Right, a wildfire, forest fire of some kind goes through a place, and the existing foliage, okay, or flora, okay, is gone. It's dead. But that's not the end. That's not the end of everything. Okay, it'll cycle back around. It's called succession. Anyone ever heard that term before? Okay. Succession is the natural process of an environment developing again. There's primary succession, which is what we're looking at here, starting from nothing, right? Just bare rock and creating soil and letting things grow. And then there's secondary succession, where the soil's already been built. We had a climax community of very complex organisms that were all destroyed. And now we already have the base there. That secondary succession doesn't take as long. Okay, like what'll start growing right after this fire? Yeah, what's that flower called? Fireweed. Yeah, that's what it's called. Okay, for two reasons: it grows right after a fire, and its flowers look like little candles. Okay, it's fireweed. So that'll start to grow immediately after. Okay, and that'll provide shade for small shrubby plants, which will provide shade and nutrients for poplar trees and deciduous trees, which will then create an environment that's more productive for the spruce saplings that are very slow growing. That would be, their seeds would have been released right away. It takes them quite a while to get going, right? They have to have the cover of other types of plants for a few years before they can really get established, and then after a few hundred years, you'd be back to your climax community again. Okay? And it's usually a few hundred years of its natural succession. If an area has been logged and then replanted artificially with spruce trees, they're saying that they could reharvest that area within like 85 years or something like that would be the turnaround, right? So certainly if you logged it, you're not being there the second time, right? But it's short enough that it's reasonable. Okay, what if, so I mean with fire, obviously, you know, the environment's not totally destroyed. Does it change where the resources are? Definitely. Okay, and that's kind of the important part of a periodic disturbance. Sometimes an environment just becomes stagnant, and the resources are all tied up in trees, you know, big old growth trees or something like that, and it needs to be reset. Okay, so a fire is important for that. So after this, now does more sunlight penetrate to the ground? Okay, well that's a good thing. Now smaller things are going to be more successful. All right, all the nutrients that were tied up in the trees, well, these trees will eventually fall over and they'll start decomposing, and those nutrients will end up back in the soil. Slowly, of course, but okay, they'll end up back there, right? And so on and so on. So it's important to redistribute the resources and nutrients and things like that that have been tied up for a very long time in that community of old growth forest. What if we had a flood? Does that redistribute resources? Yes. Okay. I mean, along the floodplain, but still, it's redistributing things. If you've seen kind of over the last few years here since 2013, right? In 2013, 2014, even into 2015, there wasn't much growth on the floodplain around here, around High River, around Okotoks. Okay. But now you're starting to see that, you know, the rocks, there's starting to be, you know, stuff kind of growing up through them and whatever. Because when the flood happened, a lot of silt was deposited around. Okay, because did anyone help anyone like clean out? Okay, like the biggest thing, I know I went and helped a few people cleaning out places, and there was just muck, like there was just this fine silty muck everywhere, right? But that's full of nutrients. Okay, that's sediment and stuff from other places, and it's just being redeposited, okay, in new spots where new growth can happen, and it's, like I say, full of nutrients. You don't want it in your house, obviously, because it's full of nutrients. It can grow mold and other bad stuff. But okay, in a natural environment, it's great to reset the growth of everything. So that's the big thing with periodic disturbances, is that they redistribute and bring in nutrients where they may have been low. Oh, I'm not saying it's good for the plants that were there. I'm saying it's good for redistributing it and allowing new plants to grow. Yeah, I mean, it's not going to kill the trees. You know, if the trees manage to not get swept away, having all these nutrients near their roots, which, you know, when it rains, it'll percolate down into the soil, and that stuff becomes soil. It's great. Okay. Yeah. Along the riverbed, terrible. Yeah, it washed out everything. But new stuff is growing because, again, it rains and it washes that stuff down between the rocks and creates a really rich type of soil. Okay. And volcanic eruptions can do that too, depending on the type of eruption, because obviously there's different types of eruptions. Okay, if we have like an eruption like they have in Hawaii, where there's like liquid rock flowing around, that's pretty much the end of things. Okay, nothing's going to grow out of that particular rock, not for a long time. Maybe between it if it didn't get burnt, but essentially we're starting from bare rock again after an eruption like that. But after an eruption that was mostly ash, ash is full of lots and lots of nutrients. That's why in Italy and Greece, they grow so many things like olives and grapes and stuff like that, because those are very nutrient demanding plants, but they grow in volcanic soil. Okay, and so it's very rich with all the ash from previous eruptions. Okay. Tornadoes, same thing. When a tornado comes through, it blows down a lot of trees. Okay, when you get the trees blown down, it redistributes how much sunlight can get to the soil. Okay, those trees are killed off, so there's more opportunity to get water out of the soil because they're not taking it. So again, it's just about a redistribution of things. Okay, then there's biotic components, and we haven't talked about any of these. These are the living things in the environment that can affect the growth of a plant. Okay, so living things that can affect the growth of a plant, first off, are other plants. Okay, and they affect plants affect each other in a competitive way. They have to compete for light, for nutrients, for water, for all those abiotic things we just talked about, right? So having other plants in the area is going to produce competition. Okay, then you've got all your decomposing organisms. They're working for you. They're breaking down the stuff that's in the soil and releasing the nutrients. Okay, they're a biotic component that is helping out the plants in the environment. And then there's insects. Some of them are good, and some of them aren't necessarily so good for each type of plant. Okay, if it's a kind of a parasitic type of insect where it's hollowing out a tree and making a nest inside, like woodcutter ants, okay, then that's obviously not that good for that tree. But for the environment as a whole, that helps. That tree was probably old and sick anyway. It'll help it to speed the process of it falling down and getting its nutrients back. Okay, so all of these living creatures are again helping with the distribution or making available, okay, other resources for the plant. So they do play, all of them, an important role. What about grazing animals? It's good. Yeah. I mean, it's not good immediately. Nobody likes to get eaten, but plants can grow back, right? And if you or I got eaten, we'd have a bigger problem. But with a plant, obviously it grows back and it grows from the buds and it's going to end up being fuller, right? So there's an interaction that goes on. These all affect, the biotic components can affect the abiotic components. Okay, taking up water by plants. I don't think I put this part in there. I think this is where I cut yours off, right? Okay, so this is what the root looks like, okay, in cross section. So if I cut a root, okay, there's the root cortex, and that's where kind of the bulk of the absorption occurs. There's the epidermis that protects it, and then inside is the vascular cylinder. So this would be the phloem, okay, the red part there. And then inside of that is the xylem. Okay, so all of this on the inside is tubes that are designed to carry the water, right? So obviously the phloem is here because the cortex is living. The xylem is not. Okay, the xylem tubes are essentially dead phloem tubes, so they're not really doing much other than that they're hollow and water can go through them, right? So the phloem is here, and it's brought the water down from the leaves, and then the sugar will diffuse between the cells and into the cells as they need it. Because the plant grows outwards, right? A plant doesn't grow from the inside, it grows by adding layers to the outside. Nothing other than because its cells are alive, sugar moves down. Yeah.
How does the like when water initially is in the first time? How does it get up? I know like it gets pulled up by the evaporation, like chain. But if it's that far down, like it would be able to.
Well, again, there's a certain amount of energy stored in like the buds. So they get started. They can carry out enough photosynthesis to kind of prime the system and get it going. Yeah. All right. So like I say, most of the water absorption occurs through the little root hairs, not through the big parts here. Okay, so the little bits here that have the great surface area to volume ratios will absorb the water, and then it'll get into the cortex. Okay, kind of diffuse through the cortex and into the xylem where it'll be taken up. All right. Don't worry, you don't need to know what that is. That's why it's that small. Just to remind me not to talk about it. Yes. Yeah. All right. So there's two paths that water can go through to get into the xylem. One is fast and one is slow. Right? If a plant is desperate, so it's been dry for a very long time, suddenly water is available, it's going to go through the quick route. Okay, and the quick route is the apoplastic route. Okay, and that means that it actually passes between all of the cells, not through any of them. So if it's only passing between them, what's not happening to that water? Well, it's still sort of diffusion, but it doesn't get filtered. Okay, because it never passes through any cell membranes, it's still got everything in it that was in the soil. So there's a chance that stuff that's not good for the plant could be picked up that way. If the plant is not, in a dire situation, then the water will go through the symplastic route, which actually involves it passing through all of the cells on its way there, through those little plasmodesmata, those little holes that I told you didn't matter. Okay, those are kind of the way it goes through, and it gets that way kind of filtered by all of the cells it passes through. All right, and we kind of already talked about that, so, and we don't need to talk about that either. Okay, different types of plants adapt to different types of situations, okay? There are things called hydrophytes, okay? And hydrophytes are plants that can tolerate large amounts of water, essentially can tolerate being flooded, okay, for long periods of time. So in the tropical rainforest, they adapt to that by having essentially different kinds of roots. Okay, so these would be your anchoring roots that you can see here, because this area had been flooded and a bunch of the soil had been washed away, so the roots were exposed. So these are kind of the anchoring roots. They absorb water and things like that. And then there's these roots up here, which the guy who was giving me the tour, okay, told me they call them snorkel roots because they serve a purpose just like a snorkel. Okay, it's hard to tell from this picture, but to give you some sense of scale, me being about 6 feet tall, standing next to that tree would have come up to about there. Okay, so unless there's a really severe flood where the water is 6 feet above ground level, okay, for an extended period of time, these snorkel roots allow the plants to provide oxygen to the roots that are down here, that are submerged and in an anaerobic environment, right? So they're like a snorkel, right? These roots, like I say, they're just for absorbing water. Okay, so that's one of the adaptations. Okay, other adaptations could be that you make sure you have very broad leaves that can float. Okay, like a lily, and they just kind of float on the top of the water. Okay, meanwhile the rest of the plant is kind of down below. Okay, and then you got plants that are xerophytes. Okay, xerophytes live in very arid or very dry areas. They have to be able to tolerate long periods without any water at all. Okay, we sometimes also call them succulents. Okay, they're obviously very, very different. They have very thick cuticles. They might have the C4 leaf instead of the C3 leaf. Okay, in fact, they may not have leaves at all. They may have had their leaves modified to be thorns, like on a cactus, okay, and things like that. So they're going to also be able to separate the two parts of photosynthesis, the light gathering part and then the part that requires evaporation, and have the part that requires evaporation occur at night. Okay, and that would help to limit the amount of evaporation. So, all right, I think that's all we need to know about that one. Yeah, so xerophytes, like I say, they are CAM plants or C4 plants, and they obviously carry out their photosynthesis a little bit differently. Okay, how old do you suppose this cactus is? It's very old, several hundred years old. A saguaro cactus won't grow its first arm until it's almost 100 years old. Okay, so if you see a saguaro cactus that's got lots of arms, you're looking at a very old cactus. Okay, because they have to be quite mature before they start the budding process that creates other arms. Okay, so this one is very old because some of its arms have arms. Okay, so it's quite an old cactus. That's one cactus. Oh, probably about 50 feet. Yeah, 50. Yeah, it's pretty tall. Yeah, like it was easily the height of the gym. Let's say 30 feet. Height of the gym. Yeah, height of the gym. Yeah. Yeah. Most of them don't get that tall. Most of them are. Well, you look at this rock. This is a rock you would have to climb up. Like Arizona. That's yeah. Yeah. You can see 30 feet. Most of them don't get that tall. This was an exceptional specimen. Okay. Most saguaro cacti live to be 10 or 15 feet. Right. Yeah. Something was right about the environment for that thing. It's just a supreme specimen. Yeah. All right. All right. We're gonna leave it at that. I've taught you everything in the bio unit now. Okay. So on Monday, we're going to start the research project. So you'll be researching a plant species of your choice. So you might want to think over the weekend about what plant you think is interesting. Okay, maybe saguaro cactus because they're pretty cool. Okay, like I say though, most of them don't grow that tall. It was an exceptional specimen. Okay, so that's what we'll start on Monday, but you still have a few minutes in class here, so you have an opportunity if any questions came up from the review yesterday to ask, or just to do some more review for your exam. Andrew?
So is our plant, is it like our bio research project? Is that gonna be like a project?
Yeah, it's going to be very much like the time. Yeah.